Hello everyone, welcome back to another Ken Reads episode, the second last before the round of September batch letters is finally over. I know I've stretched this into October, but you know, sometimes I've got to take a break. But welcome to what is going to be a really good letter reading. The letter that I've got today from Amanda is a really good one because this is a person who's actually no stranger to therapy. They're also no stranger to dating people who are avoidantly attached. And even after a lot of work, even after being aware of these patterns, they still found themselves in a situationship with a fearful avoidant. So today I'm going to be joined by my colleague Laura from Quit Dating Idiots, and we're going to unpack and go through Amanda's letter. And this time, whilst normally a lot of you who are familiar with my segment know I do a lot of validation, explaining, being like, this is why the avoidant does this. This is how this dynamic occurs. I'll still do that. But this time I'm also going to add a bit more observations for being like, hey, what was going on here for you, Amanda, that, you know, maybe have contributed to this dynamic as well too? Because usually I find that a lot of people who've dated a lot of, you know, individuals who are avoidantly attached get to a point where they're like, right, now I can see this is a recurring pattern for me and I need to work on this. And Amanda themselves is also no stranger to wanting to take accountability and responsibility on this one. So that's why I just thought I'd preface and say the style of this one is going to be a little different. Anyways, I'm going to bring on Laura and we will get this show started. Also, hello to everyone who's here today, and I hope you're all going very well. Okay, just invited Laura.
Okay.
Hey, Laura, how you going?
I'm good. We're just loading still.
I think we're all good, which is a very good place to go from here.
Good.
Amazing. So, before we get into Amanda's letter, would you like to introduce yourself for everyone?
Yes, sure. So I'm Laura Forbes, and I run an Instagram account called Quit Dating Idiots. And the work that I do with clients is centered around helping people that have typically had anxious attachment style tendencies to reconnect with their authentic self and get back into alignment with themselves and healthier, secure relationships.
Fantastic. And I figured, as someone who's no stranger to therapy and also situationship style stuff that goes on, particularly with those that are avoidantly attached, you would make a fabulous co-host for unpacking one of my followers' experiences, providing validation, explanation, and also some pointers for some feedback and being like, maybe think about this going forward. So I thought you'd be a great person to come on board for this one.
Perfect. Thanks for inviting me. I can't currently see your face. Is that normal?
No, that's not normal.
I've just got like a black bit where you should be, I think.
That's funny because I can see you.
Okay.
I was going to say, if you want, do you want to, if it's a black screen, I might be happy to restart the live and try again. Otherwise, do you want to maybe see if you can fix it on your end, or we wait for a little bit?
Yeah, I've waited a little bit, but I don't really know what the fix would be. Because it would normally just come up, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Is there a way for me to exit this live and come back in and see if that makes a difference?
Yeah, do you want to do that and then just come back?
Yes, sure. So I'll just abruptly leave.
Yeah. Thank you everyone for your patience with us. We're just gonna make sure that Laura can see me, because then it's gonna be a really awkward live otherwise. Yeah, she's just dropping and rejoining now, so she'll be back. In any case, hope everyone is going well with regards to their day. And also, just as a reminder that the Ken Read submissions for letters will be open again on this Friday at midday. So if you are looking to submit, you're very welcome to when we open that up again too. All right, just re-inviting Laura now. Hopefully, fingers crossed, this all works out this time. All right, that better?
No.
Oh, no, we're going through technical stuff.
Yeah. Literally no idea on the fix.
All right, I'll tell you what. Maybe I'm happy to restart live and see if that works instead. So maybe that'll work.
Okay. When I got booted off and it was showing me like the delayed of the live, I could see us both on there. So I think it's obviously working for everyone else, just not me.
Okay. Well, I was gonna say if you're okay with, I'm very happy to just like take natural pauses, and if you can hear me fine, that's all good.
Okay.
You'll just have to pretend you can see my face.
Yes, I know. Shame that I
I
can't see your
will.
face.
All right. Let's see how we go with this. All right, let's get into it. So, Amanda writes, thank you for all your great content and for reading my letter out. I've been healing my insecure attachment for 7 years and wanted to share my experience of a short, intense situationship with an avoidant attacher. I met Marcus on a dating app end of August 2023. My life was very busy at the time, so I just wanted to enjoy fun dates, but was open to a long-term relationship. Marcus gave hippie vibes in his profile, but he also mentioned that he worked in the medical field, so I felt like he was someone I could connect with. And he also shared my love of spirituality and science. He asked me to go for a drink almost immediately, which I liked. I said I was quite busy that week, and he sent me both his phone number and Instagram handle and said he was free most nights, so to let him know when I was also available. Now, I texted him the next day, and we arranged to meet later that week for a walk late Sunday afternoon. By the end of the week, I hadn't heard from him, but due to how I was busy and knowing what people are up to, especially with ghosting, I wasn't too disappointed. Sunday came around, and he texted me in the morning asking if I was still up for meeting later that day, and I said yes. Upon seeing Marcus for the first time, my gut said, nah, no initial crush. He's lied about his height, but maybe we have similar hobbies, so maybe he could be a friend. Because I wasn't physically attracted to him at first glance, I remember thinking, this date'll be over quickly. The date ended up lasting 7 hours. He initially bombarded me with information about himself, like his job, how many hours he works, how much he earns, what his hobbies are. Said he eats really clean, doesn't drink much alcohol, doesn't watch TV, etc. I felt quite overwhelmed with this information. It was like he was trying too hard, but it's hard to tell on a first date if someone is just nervous. Where something didn't align with me, I was honest. I was determined to show up completely as myself. He said he liked that I had a strong personality, but he also seemed chill. We also talked about deep intellectual topics ranging from science to mental health and philosophy. We seemed to align in what we were looking for in a relationship, saying we're open to a long-term relationship, but wanted to take things slow and appreciated having our own time and space. And he told me that he started working on his past trauma in therapy. He was also looking into psychology, both for himself and also generally as a subject of interest. I remember feeling a spark of attraction, but still not being sure. The date ended with a kiss, and I left feeling intrigued but not infatuated, which felt like a healthy balance given that in the past I've been all or nothing with dating. And last thing I'll say before we take a pause, over the following weeks, we went on romantic dates, do things I'd suggest. He seemed keen to make sure we did what I wanted. He was more tactile than me and would hold my hand or cuddle in public. All right, let's take a pause here. So there's already a lot going on. Laura, what are your thoughts?
Well, where do we begin? So, I'm just looking down at my notes, by the way. So, first thing is obviously Amanda saying that she's been working on healing her anxious attachment or insecure attachment for 7 years. So that's a lot of self-work, self-reflection, and that's really good. I think one of the first things that pops out to me is in terms of like the no initial crush when she first saw him, and then what then made her want to stay for like 7 hours. So is it like the conversation was flowing, even though obviously it sounds like a lot of that was centered around himself. But another thing that kind of popped out was when she mentioned that they'd kind of set up this date and there was no communication for a few days, right? Like that is pointing towards like compartmentalizing, which can be quite common with avoidance, right? It's, I think, speaking from myself, my preferences would be to have that open line of communication, even if it's just like a little check-in every day, ideally for me, but if not that, then every couple of days, right? So that there is that connection still there. And I guess like in the early stages of dating, you can make some allowances with that. But again, that would be a little signpost of like, oh, is this person compartmentalizing me right before we've even met? And then how serious are they about wanting to get to know someone and actually connect?
Yeah, I completely agree with regards to what you've said. I don't think like Amanda's entirely, at fault for the thinking and the feelings that she was having prior to and leading up to this. Like, I think the fact that she was kind of like, meh, if this doesn't go ahead, oh well, it is what it is. Like, I think
Yeah.
that's actually quite a healthy attitude to have, to be honest. I think the thing that I'm curious about for Amanda is like, how did we suddenly go from not really feeling it to having a 7 hour date, which is consistent with what you were saying too? Because I'm thinking, it's interesting how even in the letter, what I really like about what Amanda's done here is, she said, oh, he wanted to talk about his life, his stuff. There was an overwhelm of information, and it makes me think, my God, this must have been very captivating information because, normally it's very easy for people to be absolutely bored out of their mind listening to someone talk about themselves. But this guy must have had enough similar stuff going on between the two of you to the point that you stayed connected and also wanted to do this. Like, I mean, what was supposed to be a casual date seems like it actually turned into quite a full-on experience of exchanging stuff between the two of you. Not to mention, there's that similar interest between, he's a doctor and has a fascination for spirituality. He's also looking into psychology for himself and just as a subject of interest. There's obviously there's enough stuff there that's got you hooked and interested in this, even if, there's already some potential warning lights going on here.
Yeah, and I think when Amanda introduced at the beginning of the letter there was saying like, my experience of a short, intense situationship with an avoidant. And like that date is obviously not short, but it sounds
Yeah.
intense, right?
Yeah. And I think that's a big warning sign of someone with a dysregulated nervous system is rush, intensity, and being full on. And I find it strange that he's like, oh, I want to take it slow. It's like, bro, you just spent 7 hours having a date with someone. That's not the definition of slow.
I'd also be interested to see, because obviously we've just got the letter, right? But like the actual percentages or the dynamic of that backwards and forwards of the communication on the date, right? Like, was it heavily on Marcus's side in terms of like him taking up all the airspace? Because when we're getting to know someone, we kind of want that, balance, right? Of both equally sharing. And again, not knowing all the details of what exactly Marcus was sharing about himself, but sounds like potentially that loose boundaries, right? Of like someone you just met and you're kind of like, giving them all this information about yourself. It's like, where's, often in the beginning stages of dating, it's often, advised to not drip feed, but you don't want to be giving everyone your life history from that initial first meet, right? It's more of like a feeling each other out and that backwards and forwards of getting to know each other equally.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think that, when it comes to this particular situation, I think that, I worry that, there was maybe too much, there was probably too much stuff going on in that first date where from like when we look at it from like a nervous system perspective as well too, I could imagine just being like, I don't even know what to make of this entire situation and I
Yeah.
also wonder if for Amanda, she was just sort of sussing this out over the 7 hours and being like, do I want to invest in this? How do I feel about this too? And I think a lot of us, when we go into dating, almost rely so heavily on the how am I feeling to judge whether or not I like the person or not. And our feelings aren't always a useful guide for sussing out whether a person's actually a viable partner or not. But it does seem like there would have probably been enough enthusiasm and oxygen to keep this going for as long as it did.
Yeah, definitely. When you were talking, then it sounded like the word that popped into my head was like overwhelm. Like I'm imagining that situation could be quite overwhelming to be on the receiving end of all of that information. But it definitely sounds like Amanda went in with that open mind, right? So she had an initial, which we all have, like those judgments, right? Of, oh, I'm not sure if I fancy him or, whatever. But still went in with that open mind to experience the date for what it was.
Completely agree. So Let's continue with what Amanda has to say. So she continues, I noticed that Marcus spent his time doing the same activities outside of work, literally on repeat. For someone who claimed to be such a free spirit, he seemed to control a lot of his own life and live in a very binary way. Cracks appeared 3 weeks into dating when I texted him saying my friends were excited to see him. He reacted to this message with a laughing emoji, but nothing else. This was the first conscious trigger for me, a minor detail, but it felt like I'd been pushed off a cliff. Ugh. Later that week, we had a cinema date. Everything was fine to begin with, but on the way there, he told me he'd been thinking about a plan to go traveling abroad again and how he'd have to hand his notice in at work immediately to be ready to go into the new year. Now, at the time, this didn't really blindside me because he'd mentioned wanting to go abroad again on previous dates we'd been on, but I didn't realize he'd meant to go overseas so soon. He'd shared that during the pandemic, he'd gone traveling with a long-term ex-girlfriend who started dating someone 8 weeks after they broke up. I couldn't comprehend wanting to return to someone, especially after they'd been such a subject of such bad memories. It just seemed like something that was quite unusual, given the fact that I'm not the kind of person who would spend similar time with an ex who I'd had bad memories for. I could also see that this hurt him, even though he'd had multiple girlfriends since then. But it sounded like he'd put a lot of thought into this, and he thought he could make this trip work. And he also would say to me, it's okay, because now I know it's casual. So before we continue, Laura, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, the first big thing there is that feeling like you've been pushed off a cliff, right? So that's quite a strong description, a strong feeling. Um, and so again, when dating, it's interesting to kind of monitor those feelings, right, and work out what's maybe a trigger from a past situation, and this is kind of echoing that, versus what are you picking up on because something's kind of, an internal warning light's going off, as in whether it's just like, this sounds like it might not be compatible, or this is making, I'm reading this or interpreting this as, fill in the blank. So I think that's a really useful bit of information, right, when we're in these situations, is to really pay attention to those feelings and explore, what is behind that. Is that her picking up on something? And then with him mentioning the travel, for me, like, could be innocent, or it's almost, is that a bit of foreshadowing, right? Like, as we know, this was a short situationship, and it's like, is this part of just kind of dropping those little foreshadowing crumbs of like, I'm not necessarily going to be sticking around here. Which again, it's not necessarily problematic in the early stages of dating. You're just getting to know someone, and working out if you're on the same page. But again, that's just something that popped out to me.
Yeah, it's interesting you should say that. Like I would agree with that, and it makes me think, this is a great example of where these moments between the laughing emoji that Marcus left when Amanda was expressing her desire to introduce her friends to Marcus, plus also the way in which he was engineering his leave quite abruptly,
Mm.
whilst he was going on dates with her. These are things where they're quite subtle. And in the moment, to be fair to Amanda, it's like, okay, well, hang on a second. You know, is this something that I need to worry about and to become reactionary about? Or, as you said, is this foreshadowing of things to come? And we know that for avoidant attachers, some of them can be very equivocal about meeting your friends and family, because then, oh, that's right, things are starting to get committed, real, and they don't necessarily like that. But a laughing emoji off the back of that too, it's very easy for us to spiral and think, oh my God, maybe they don't want this, and for us to have those abandonment fears. And then also for that to blend a little bit with a bit of intuition, where it's like, I actually just think this guy doesn't actually feel comfortable doing this. So it can be a really
Yeah.
great example of where our anxiety and intuition start to merge a little bit, and it's hard to discern what the hell is actually going on. But we also know with the second example, with regards to travel, that avoidant attachers do often find ways to get in the way of a relationship by having a distraction show up. So, with the power of hindsight, it's a little easy to be like, I actually think this guy was sabotaging the relationship on both of those instances.
Yeah, and I will just loop back to that the laughing emoji, right? Because again, to give him not the benefit of the doubt, but to look at it from a slightly different angle, it's first of all, this is over text, right? So it's like easy for things to be miscommunicated or, to not necessarily pick up on the weight that someone's giving to a certain comment. Um, and again, we're all on that, you know, spectrum of attachment, right? So even someone who's more secure might think like, oh, for me, talk of meeting friends and family seems a little bit premature at this point, right? Like, and again, not specifically relating this to this at this moment, but we've all got those preferences and timelines, right? So maybe Amanda's timeline is like, yes, it feels like I want someone that I can introduce to friends and family, and for me, this feels like the right kind of time for that. For the other person, it might be like, oh no, that for me feels a bit further off. But the key there is obviously communication. And if it's an in-person conversation, you're more likely to get that kind of nuance and pick up on tone and stuff. Then it's easier to kind of dismiss something or avoid something over a text, right? So a little bit of benefit of the doubt with that one. But like you said, when we're building a picture here, right? So it's not just the laugh emoji. If everything else had been, smooth sailing at that point, the laugh emoji would not maybe have packed as much of a punch in that feeling of feeling like you're being pushed off a cliff, right? It's more like we're starting to see some patterns forming here, right? We're starting, like you said, to have that kind of intuition, and it's starting to trigger some anxieties at this point.
Correct. And I want to add to what you just said. We also started this entire experience, lest we forget, on under communication. Because leading up to the very first date, there was an absence of communication leading up to that Sunday. Then there was a overwhelming amount of communication on the first date. And then all of a sudden, you're getting an emoji reaction to catching up with friends, and then also you've also gone on these really good dates in between there as well too. So to me, a picture that I'm seeing already is there's inconsistency in the amount and the volume of communication. So I can understand if maybe a part of you was picking up being like, something feels inconsistent with what I've had just recently.
Yeah, and like we said, especially pairing it with those conversations about travel, you were just starting to build a picture here of like, oh, maybe this person's not, not committed, not available, not seeing, not giving this situation the same kind of consideration as this person is, right? So definitely.
Yeah. But to anyone out there listening to this story of Amanda, like, I mean, it's very hard when you're 3 weeks in and maybe a bit invested to actually make these decisions, because this stuff, when you're in the thick of it, it's so hard to identify the signs of what will potentially, be trouble down the line as well too. It's not like this guy has come out, with a sign being like, I'm going to give you heartbreak, or he's doing any of those conventional narcissistic things of being like, all my exes are crazy. In fact, he's the one saying, oh, I didn't get on with one of my exes, but I'm still deciding to keep her around in the picture. I got to be honest though, if there was ever an avoidant red flag, that'd be it. Because usually I find particularly fearful avoidance, and some dismissives have a tendency to keep a harem of exes around. And it's just like, why would you still want to hang out with people that you don't like? Like, but again, particularly for fearfuls, they do this because of their low self-esteem, and they're constantly chasing people who don't even like them back. And I think it also speaks to their low self-esteem and wanting to try and, get someone to love them who's never going to love them in the first place.
Yeah, and I just noticed that first part of the letter I wrote down, when Amanda was telling us that Marcus was offering up a lot of information, talking about himself a lot. And it's that whole thing of, don't tell me who you are, show me. So, regardless of what the content of his conversation was on these dates and what he might have been saying, like his actions or inactions at this point are starting to paint a picture all of their own.
Beautifully said. I completely agree with you. So let's continue with what Amanda has written. So, blah, blah. So continuing on, Amanda continues talking about the film that they saw. The film finished around 11:30 p.m. We went back to his place. We were getting ready for bed. I came out of the bathroom and watched him, Marcus, down a glass of red wine. This rung an alarm bell inside of me because this didn't seem like normal behavior for Marcus, because he had said that he'd barely drunk before, but then shared with me that previously his father was an alcoholic who was abusive, and that Marcus had grown up in a very dysfunctional environment which caused his parents to separate when he was a teenager, and that he was sent to boarding school from the ages of 11 to 16, but his younger sister wasn't. Afterwards, we got into bed. He started backtracking on what he'd said earlier, saying he didn't want to settle in another country, and he was talking about stuff he wanted to do with me in the future. I felt so confused because it felt like word vomit. We'll come back to that. We discussed it for a bit longer and then kissed each other goodnight. I put my earplugs in to go to sleep and said goodnight. I heard him quietly respond, so I took my earplugs out and asked, "Did you say something?" He said goodnight and grinned. I replied with good night, put the earplugs back in, and turned over. Again, I heard him say the same thing quietly. It took a couple of seconds to process, but I realized what he whispered both times was, "I love you." I genuinely don't think he meant for me to hear what he'd said because he said it so quietly. In that moment, I felt really triggered and confused by this whole interaction. It also felt too fast for me to be dropping L-bombs, but I left it and went to sleep. The following weeks were rocky. He began cancelling plans for his hobbies, but also saying he wanted to see me. My diary was stacked, and I wasn't willing to drop everything when we'd already made plans that he'd cancelled. I felt disappointed, but acted cool about it. I was still on the dating apps at this point, and as far as I was concerned, I wasn't getting my needs met by someone who was blowing hot and cold. So I went on a date with someone else. It was fantastic as a first date, but I was already invested in Marcus, so I didn't see this other guy again. The day after the date, I texted Marcus. We hadn't spoken all week, which he didn't even acknowledge after cancelling plans. I asked if he'd even thought any more about going travelling to open the conversation. He replied with something along the lines of, "No, I'm too busy for that right now." I asked if we could talk and said that I was enjoying dating him but didn't feel like my needs were being met. Good on you. The first time I've ever expressed this to someone in dating. Yeah, well, good on you. He somewhat validated what I said, but said he didn't know what life held for him at that point, but understood my needs, which didn't feel true as I hadn't expressed them to him. Shortly after, I sent a huge message reflecting on how secure I felt at the beginning of the relationship versus how I felt recently, which was in stark contrast. I was open, vulnerable, and suggested that as he was dedicated to going away, it'd be fair for us both to also date other people because he was giving casual vibes. I'm not used to standing up for myself, so I wasn't convinced he'd reply. To my surprise, he replied almost immediately. We then had an argument over text. He said it seemed easier if you date someone who has the exact same hobbies as you. During the argument, he also sent me a screenshot of one of my own messages, and I realized he hadn't even saved my number on his phone. We'd been dating for 4 weeks. The back and forth was frustrating. He kept misinterpreting my messages for digs and point scoring when I was trying to be as gentle but direct as possible. It was infuriating. We left it by saying we'd talk more, but I could tell he was getting defensive and triggered. Alrighty, let's take a pause here. Oh my God, have the cracks turned into fishes?
Yeah. Okay. Where to begin?
Yeah, we're in debt.
Let's start with the wine. So, by the sounds of that, how it's written, it's not like he was like, "Hey, shall we have a glass of wine and chat and unwind before bed?" It's like he's just literally shot in a glass of wine, which is yeah, a bit unusual. Um, okay, and we're also starting to see some of his trauma emerge, right? Like potential trauma, whether he's done anything with that in terms of processing and therapy, in terms of if this has been an alcoholic or abuse in the family. That's obviously something to pinpoint. Um, I heard this thing around, I forget who it's from, but it was like the three yikes rule, right? So rather than the three strikes rule in dating, like the three yikes, as in like if something makes you internally go like, oh, yikes. So we've already had the feeling like I've been pushed off a cliff, right? Yikes, number one. Then we've got like the seeing that him kind of down a glass of wine. Again, it's kind of yikes territory, right? Of like, well, I'm feeling confused and this stark contrast. So these are starting to stack up at this point. Yeah, interesting.
I agree. And I think the drinking of wine piece bothers me because it's interesting how he had claimed in the beginning how clean he was. He
Mhm.
doesn't drink anymore. And I think it's a bit weird sort of behavior to not invite your partner for a drink if you're going to go to bed together. And
Exactly.
given the fact that he's also, and I will say this as someone who's read a lot about addiction, particularly regarding alcoholics, if you are a child of an alcoholic, you know what it's like to come from dysfunction and trauma, and usually you have lots of it, even if you're not aware of it. And so if you're someone who is giving a bit of a trauma dump on top of the fact that you're also having a glass of wine, it would suggest to me that maybe there is a potential addiction issue that Marcus is not also talking about. The rest of the letter doesn't seem to indicate there's an addiction issue at this particular point in time, but this is starting to raise a bit of a big yike for me, because I'm like, there's unresolved trauma here that's potentially going to rear its head in the future. And I also think too, like, what triggered him to have that glass of wine before bed? You know, for a bit of for a bit of education for anyone who's not aware, often a lot of our unprocessed subconscious thoughts and feelings often do come to us as we're going to bed and as we're waking up of a morning, because our rational brain isn't as fully active at that particular point, so we're not as distracted. So it makes me think, you know, is he trying to manage some internal stuff there at that particular moment? Is he also going through a bit of a fear of intimacy, of getting closer to Amanda at that point?
Yeah.
We can only speculate, but it is very odd behavior.
That's where my mind went thinking, because again, we don't know, was this the first time Amanda had gone to his house and stayed over? And if so, maybe there's that mounting pressure, the mounting intimacy, especially if he's then dropping, the love bombs when she's turning to go to sleep. Like he's obviously feeling things right at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe he's feeling uncomfortable with his own emotions. But like you said, it's almost like, okay, I mean, maybe as downs a glass of wine before bed every night, we don't know. But um, in this situation, again, it's just like connecting those dots, right? Of like, okay, he's obviously maybe feeling a little bit dysregulated, especially because it's done in that. And again, this is just my take on that. Is it's not done in a social, connected setting of like, let's share a bottle of wine or let's have a couple of glasses of wine before bed. Almost like she wasn't supposed to see it is kind of how it
Yeah.
comes across in the letter, right? So therefore, we've maybe got some shame going with that, right? Like the secret behavior going on there potentially.
We don't really want secret behavior going on in that context, because that usually leads to more yikes than I care to count.
Absolutely.
So there's that. Then let's take a moment to talk about the fucking love bombs that were going off, in bed, where he wasn't open to disclose it too. Like, I agree with Amanda, way too soon. But everything about this entire situationship screams way too soon.
Yes. It screams confusing because this is the guy that's put the laugh emoji to, the less intense suggestion of meeting some friends and family, right? So that's maybe one of his yikes that's internalized, but to then be saying I love yous, I don't know, it's again confusing, which is often, a big signpost of dealing with someone with avoidant tendencies, right?
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think that, with this particular situation as well, I think I want to go back to what you were saying before, which is I think the fact that he couldn't even vocalize that properly to you is interesting. The fact that he had to hush it down makes me think, oh, he was not comfortable saying that at all. Which is not to say that he didn't feel it. I suspect he did. But I think this is a great illustration of his fears sound far greater than his capacity to love. And I think it goes back to your point, which is at this moment, his actions are way more inconsistent than his words.
Absolutely. And to that point too, so, we all have these feelings, right? And sometimes, even if you've done a lot of work, like Amanda's, 7 years in healing and therapy. So even when we have done that level of attunement, we sometimes get confused about what we are feeling or what that means. So again, we don't know much about Marcus in terms of his healing journey, if there's even been one, but maybe what he was feeling was not necessarily love, but maybe the infatuation was getting stronger, right?
Yeah.
Like, and maybe he's confusing that at that point for love, because like we've said, at that point, 4 weeks in, you don't particularly know someone. You might have strong feelings, and it might be, I like this person a lot, or I'm infatuated with this person. But, at this point, is it really love that he's feeling?
Well, that's true. I mean, I've gently said to some people before that limerence is like a very juvenile form of love, and that I think can tie a little bit into infatuation. But I agree with you. And we know that a lot of people who are severely in that fearful avoidant territory, the severe fearful avoidance have a tendency to become very infatuated with the idea of you. And it's like, oh my God, like,
Yeah.
they get very into the romance side of it. They're very into like the whining, the dining, the idea of dating you. That's why their future faking feels phenomenal, because they genuinely are excited about the idea of these things. They have no, but like when push comes to shove and they actually have to do the thing, they freak the fuck out. And I think it's interesting how things seem to devolve quite quickly off the back of those love bombs. Like he's gone from dropping the I love yous to no longer communicating as frequently as well too. So already we're getting very jarring behavior. And I gotta give you credit, Amanda, where it's due. Good on you for not bending like a beachside deck chair and giving him availability when he was coming back to you with wonky dates. You were like, nah, I'm busy. I'm not available for this. The fact that you were still on the dating apps at that point, good on you, because I think, why would you want to entertain someone who's being a bit all over the shop? I like the fact too that you actually communicated how things had been very different from where they were to where they are now. But it is interesting how he just could not handle having a proper conversation with you about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we you mentioned something before, right, about the alcohol when he'd kind of presented as someone that doesn't really drink. And again, it's just linking back to that foreshadowing at the very beginning of, oh, this is someone who's lied about his height, right? So it's like, is this someone that's maybe not seeing themselves accurately or choosing to portray themselves in a way that, they might hope to be, but is not necessarily grounded in the authenticity of who they are at this moment?
I should also add, because Amanda's told me this guy who's of Hungarian descent also has a big Samoan tattoo on his shoulder as well too. I'm not usually one to talk about this as a subject, but in terms of like, not so much the cultural appropriation side of it, but more from a personality side of it too. It's like, you know, it's interesting how some people choose to have these parts of themselves to represent who they are when it may not actually be a real reflection of what's going on internally.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, that's dangerous territory. But if you're looking at a relationship of two people, it really does need to be built on that trust and authenticity, right? Of someone who can know who they are and you can trust in that.
I agree. So let's continue with what Amanda's written. Amanda went on a holiday with friends after the argument. We texted a lot whilst I was away. When I returned, he asked to see me. We chatted about things from the argument and it cleared the air. He then said he'd like to meet my family. Whoa. It felt suspicious that he'd barely been able to react to a text about meeting my friends, but now he wanted to meet my family. But I felt proud of myself for holding boundaries and thought maybe he realized he'd lose me if he didn't try. After a few more dates where we had deep chats and he introduced me to his friends, he started to show a very passive-aggressive side. He told me in the beginning that he had a sarcastic sense of humor, which made me immediately think of my dad and how he used humor to avoid intimacy with passive aggression at times. Shortly after this, Marcus blindsided me, breaking up over a text 30 minutes before we were due to meet for a date. His message read, "I literally admire you. You are so beautiful, intelligent, but I don't have feelings for a healthy relationship. I don't want to waste your time." My abandonment and rejection wounds were triggered. My walls went up. All I saw from this message was, this person does not choose you. And I accepted the breakup without a fight. He appreciated me accepting it and said he felt he had to say something before things went deeper. 6 months later, I reached out to say how he'd made me feel during the breakup, good on you, that it felt like it was a very one-sided decision. I needed to do this to get my closure, and considering how badly we'd communicated over text, I suggested meeting in person. He replied immediately, being overtly nice, saying how great it was to hear from me and that he still thought of me a lot. He felt ending the relationship abruptly was for the benefit of my feelings, but is now seeing someone else, so wouldn't be appropriate to meet because he couldn't look at me with fresh eyes. He said the decision he'd made was based from his intuition, but said in hindsight he could have, should have questioned that intuition, and I deserved someone who was sure about me. I told him that my intuition said otherwise, and I thought he was making the decision from a place of fear. The conversation ended with him agreeing we should meet up to talk. That was back in April, and I never heard from him again. Wow. Okay, we've got a little bit more to go, but I want to take a break here because fuck me. Like, whoa. Laura, what are your thoughts?
Well, my honest thoughts is no. So what I'm interested in, because it doesn't really the letter doesn't go into this so much, is Amanda's reaction to that of like, okay, this is a person that doesn't choose me. But I'm wondering, like, how was Amanda's feeling about her choosing this person throughout this experience, right? Because I know she was taking things slow, a considered pace, and she was, being aware of some of these flags and yikes that were popping up. And she's even been on this other great date, right, as a contrast. So at this point, I'm wondering how much she was actually really truly invested in actually, wanting to choose this person for herself at that point. That's something that comes up for me. What also comes up is this impulsiveness, right? Like cancelling a date 30 minutes before is quite impulsive. And often again, it is pointing to that dysregulation, and not having that impulse control at that moment. Um, Using humor to avoid intimacy, yes, very common. And the passive aggressiveness, right? Again, another yikes flagging up there.
And to add to that too, I want to also mention that I find it extremely interesting how you went from having an argument over where things were at to then him being like, I want to meet your family. It's like, whoa, how did we go
Yeah.
from settling a dispute to suddenly cannonballing to another major milestone of the relationship, which is still a situationship? And previously, as Amanda mentioned, he wasn't even that enthusiastic to even see the friends. So it's just like, again, it's this theme of like really jarring sort of stuff going on here too, where it's so hot and cold. And I don't think this is a case of he's just not that into you, or, if he wanted to, he would. It really sounds to me way more emotionally charged than that.
Yeah. Again, it's like, is it that impulsive, like, oh, you know, she wants this from me, so if I do this, this is gonna, help me gain control and put me back in the driving seat. Or, like, where is that coming from on his behalf? Like, what's his thinking around those decisions at that time? Is it like, I can feel this slipping away? And again, like, even if it's not communicated, which I think Amanda did mention about, like, maybe we should be dating other people, is like, if she's then gone on another date with someone and she's enjoyed that date, even if she's not pursuing it at that time, it's these subtle shifts, right? So when we're dealing with attachment, it's not always about like what's explicitly communicated. It's those subtleties that we pick up too, right? As in, what's not being
Mm-hmm.
communicated verbally, but we're still energetically picking up on. And so it sounds like maybe he's picking up on like, oh, there's a bit of, she's actually advocating for what she wants here. She's, pushing the matter of like, this is what I want, and I want to make sure we're on the same page. And that he's picking up on that of like, oh, actually, she might be getting tired of my bullshit at this point, maybe.
Yeah, he could have had a fear of abandonment moment, and he decided, I want to, actually double down and work on this now because I don't like the idea of losing this as well too. But I do feel like control is a big theme that's going on here too, because it seems like he wants to control the intimacy that's happening here.
Yeah.
I will say for Amanda, just to think about too, is that, I am curious to know, and this is a very therapist question, which obviously Amanda's not here to actually answer this, but I almost wonder, like, what's going on here that you decided to give this more time and energy and investment when there are some very dodgy sort of things going on up to this point? An unresolved argument with a guy that you've only known for 3 weeks and all this dodgy stuff. I'm wondering, like, why did you drop that other guy that you were dating and continue to invest in this? And I get why on one hand, because it's kind of like, well, I've made some, I've enjoyed the good of this. But for me, I'm sort of thinking like, I wonder if for Amanda, perhaps the good is outweighing a lot of these bad parts that, you know, he's bringing to the table, where it's like, even if it's not like glaringly bad, I'm wondering, why doesn't it feel bad enough to be like, this isn't right for me?
Yeah, even just on the compatibility point of view, right? Like not even looking at the bulk of what's gone off here, but just like those initial compatibilities of like, is this person who's, you know, has this whim to travel, you know, at any given moment, like is that compatible with what she's wanting and looking for in a partner? You know, the communication differences, the pacing of and the availability, right? The emotional openness and willingness to communicate, all of those things, regardless. But again, like when you're in these situations and you're building something with someone, right? You're sharing those moments. So I can see how that can happen. But yeah, definitely. And again, with that, asking him, you know, the closure, it's like we can't get closure. You know, like if someone doesn't know themselves, right? They're not going to really be able to give you any satisfying, substantial response, right? If you're asking for feedback, 9 times out of 10, it's going to be vague. They're not going to actually know. Um, and that almost, again, is just kind of like that setting yourself up for a bit more disappointment.
Well, although I will say I'm a big proponent of like, if you want to go and get closure from an ex, as long as you're doing it for the right reasons, which is for yourself, and you're not really bothered too much about trying to get them back, I have nothing against that. I'm like, sometimes, as you would appreciate, these experiences rob you of so much choice and agency.
Yeah.
And I agree with the man. Like, this guy took all decision making away from them, and it's not okay what he did. And the fact that he even agreed to catch up for closure and just never even communicated again or showed up. I mean, this guy's conflict averse as they come.
Yeah, I totally get what you're saying with that, but to me, that's not a surprise, right? If this person's been inconsistent, confusing the whole way
Right.
through, like that's it's not outside of that pattern, right? Like, and I completely get, right? Like, it can drive you insane not knowing, you know, the reasons why, and especially if you feel like that sense of control has been taken away, like, absolutely, that impulse will be there. But again, like expecting anything from Marcus in terms of closure and a nice, tidy little ending, you know, how it played out is kind of what I would have expected from him from that letter so far.
I would agree. Whatever he presented, like however he showed up, I think was hiding little boy energy. To
Oh,
me,
totally. Yeah,
I'm sensing this guy is like got the emotional maturity of a 10-year-old.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Which is not to say that he's not worthy of love or your time, Amanda. Obviously, this guy, you know, obviously gave great chemistry. Otherwise, you wouldn't have been invested in this too. But the fact of the matter is that there is a serious disconnect between how he presents versus what's going on internally.
Yeah. And again, I think that can be endearing in a way, right? So like it's annoying and it's incompatibility in terms of can I have a grown up secure relationship with someone who's maybe not got the emotional maturity, but there will be elements of that more kind of, you know, like she said, free spiritedness, of this person that is a bit of a selling point, right? It does hook you in. It might be different from the norm, which gives it that little bit of spark.
Until you find out they're a raging avoider.
Yeah, so I mean, we're looking at it from a favourable light, but yeah, totally annoying and totally not someone you can have a, you know, a secure relationship with. But there's obviously a reason why she got, you know, however many weeks in with this person, why she didn't pursue that other date that she went on, why she was still kind of invested in this for whatever reason.
Agreed. So let's finish off what Amanda has written. So Amanda continues, I found out he started dating the ex before me almost straight away. He told me when we were dating that they were friends who slept together and went climbing, but said it ended badly when she wanted more and he didn't. In July, I found out that he had moved her into his tiny apartment, which was the final punch to the gut and piece of closure for me. It was an intense experience, but it didn't start out like this. What I saw in us was shared interest, values, and similar life experience. I question now whether it was a trauma bond. I also see how his mask slipped many times, moments of him sharing vulnerability and a playful, silly side. He was so timid to show anger or negative emotion. It would evoke a reaction in him if I'd acknowledge it. He always wanted to return back to the chilled out version of him, which felt fake. Towards the end, I could feel his dysregulation growing, and at times it felt like we were standing back to back, taking paces away from each other, waiting to see who'd pull the trigger first. That ended the relationship. I knew deep down this wasn't healthy love. A year on, my detachment from this feels liberating, but it has taken me this time to fully recover despite it being a short, sharp situationship. I've moved through many stages with healing, but I've reached a place of gratitude for the experience, although it was intense. Our first date was still one of my favorite first dates, and I have further healed my own father wounds in therapy since this relationship ended, and I'm proud I showed up to the relationship as my whole self. I completely agree with you, Amanda. Like, I mean, look, to your credit, good on you. Like, I think that we'll get to Amanda's questions in a minute that she's got for us, but I will say, like, good on you for not only speaking up for yourself, which you said was a first, good on you for actually doing a lot of serious reflection and therapy off the back of this experience. And good on you for the humility to also go through this, because it is a nightmare. Like, even though I think there's a lot of shame around situationships, I think a lot of people think, well, it wasn't a real relationship, so why am I beating myself up over this? I got to tell you, the situationships, I've got to tell you categorically, can be more devastating than the relationship breakups. So don't ever beat yourself up over that. I'm going to take a breath. Laura, what do you want to say about this?
Yeah, I was going to say it's the fast track to healing, right? So, okay, we'd rather get to that point in a more palatable way, but this does dredge up anything that's laying dormant, right? So any unresolved, father wounds or whatever wounds, right? Or even again, like when there's been that element of discard from an avoidant, it is going to bring to the surface any of your underlying or still unresolved insecurities or vulnerabilities. I forget the exact line in the letter there, but just to point back to that part on passive aggressiveness from Marcus's side is again often a sign that someone's not comfortable with expressing their emotions, right, or expressing their needs. And so because they've learned that like I can't or I'm not allowed to or I'll be punished if I express a need or an emotion, then it comes out in that passive aggressive way, right? Rather than just saying like, hey, this is what I want, or this is what I feel, or this is what I need. And it's communicated in that kind of underhand way, which again, obviously further points to him not being in that emotional space to have a secure, healthy relationship. But yeah, I mean, definitely sounds like Amanda went through it with that one.
Yeah, I would agree. I think to me, when I hear this, it just sounds to me like, you know, Amanda definitely went through the ringer with this experience. I also have to say, consistent with what he said last time about a previous ex who he didn't get along with but was still hanging out with. I mean, it's so whack that he's going back to another ex who ended things badly with him because she wanted more and he didn't. I mean, to me, this says a few things. He knows he probably has a problem with intimacy. He keeps exes around as a way of navigating his own emotional experiences. He probably doesn't feel very good about himself. I would imagine he has raging mummy issues. And it makes sense because when you are a child, in this case, Marcus is a guy who had a father who was an alcoholic. If there was a split in the marriage, usually a mum may turn to her boy as a way of coping with the distress of the broken relationship, and that may unfortunately lead to enmeshment and emotional incest, and that is one of the biggest contributors to this problem. So I just think that when I hear this, it sounds to me like Marcus wants to control the intimacy he has, particularly with women, and I think that a lot of this was probably inevitable.
Yeah, I agree. Raging issues for sure. And the thing with that is, if they're not actively working on doing anything in terms of therapy or whatever, those issues are not going to go away, right? So he might have gone back to another relationship, but he's still the same person in that relationship, right? So it's not going to have a very happy ending, I wouldn't imagine.
No, and I want to also go back to something about how, you enjoyed his vulnerabilities. I think it's cute that he obviously had this very silly side to him, and I think that's what makes a lot of avoidance very attractive, is they have this like young boy, young girl, young person
Yeah.
energy to them. But I want to just clarify, him telling you about his, and I don't know if Amanda meant this as a vulnerability, but I just want to make it clear. Someone coming into you and telling you, I had an alcoholic dad, is not vulnerability.
Yeah. Yeah. Sounds like he's got a lot to unpack.
With a lot unpacked, or like just completely not unpacked at all. Like to me, it just sounds like, when you've, like, it sounds to me like psychology is a field of interest to him, but it doesn't sound to me like he's actually doing the work on himself.
No, and I don't know. Did Amanda say she thought he was dismissive, avoidant? I think I would get more of a fearful avoidant, with the push pull, the passive aggressiveness, that
Oh,
kind of lack of, yeah.
100%. This is not dismissive avoidant territory.
No, it's definitely got the anxious traits in there too, right? And again, like if his history, what she shared is, true and correct, like getting sent off to boarding school. So like any big thing like, parents splitting up, like, trauma, abuse in the family, alcoholic dad, all of those things in and of themselves are traumatic experiences, right? Getting sent off to boarding school as well, where you're even further removed from those attachment figures, again, is just going to be quite destabilizing. If the child hadn't had that secure base to begin with, right, and then getting sent off to a foreign environment and having to then try and survive in that as well. So, it's not necessarily through that person's fault, but when it comes to this pattern, okay, I'm struggling with growing up relationships, I'm hurting people, like I can't, I'm hurting myself at this point too, right? No doubt in how he's behaving, then it's like the responsibility falls on you now to do something about this, right? And to try and find some level of healing and work through some of these challenges.
Yes, it goes back to an analogy that I've flogged to death. You having an attachment issue is not a get out of jail free card. In fact, it's the complete opposite. You need to take this seriously because it's like having an STI. You need to plan around it. You need to think about your impact upon other people. This includes if you're anxiously attached or dismissive avoidant. Frankly, you just need to think about how your trauma might have had a profound impact not only on the way you relate with others, your personality, with a whole bunch of things too. Like, I mean, childhood neglect is a form of abuse that can really disrupt a person's brain and the way they relate to people. So I just think it's like we really should not be sugarcoating this stuff. It's like, listen, Marcus, you're going through a hard time. Wonderful. Get yourself to therapy.
Absolutely, because to use your, wonderful STI analogy, it's not, you need intervention, right? You need additional resource for that. You need, like you said, the planning, maybe the treatment, whatever. It's not something that you can just think your way out of, right? Especially if there's that level of trauma. It's not something you can just read a book or think your way out of. It's like you're going to need, and again, it's the relationship building, right? Part of the beauty of therapy or working with someone is you're building maybe your first reference of a healthy relationship, right? Sometimes in that environment where you can have your feelings validated, you can have your subjective experience and your emotions, unpacked and examined and validated with someone, which is very healing, especially if you've not had that in your upbringing.
I completely agree. But now going to Amanda's questions. So
Mm-hmm.
Amanda first asked, do you think Marcus expected me to fight for the relationship? And I'm undecided about that one. What are your thoughts?
I didn't get that vibe. That's not something that I would have um, said, oh, I think that's what he wanted. No. Maybe I'd be interested to know, like, how did he get back with the ex? Was that him reaching out? Did she reach out? Like, um, and I think even if he had have wanted it, maybe there is that element, with the anxious part. Sometimes we push people away. We want them to pull us back in or to fight for it. So it's impossible to say for sure, right? But I didn't necessarily get that vibe.
I would agree. I think that the trouble with fearful avoidant attachers is that those that are leaning more on the anxious side definitely would exhibit what you're describing, Laura, which is a tendency to, even if they're pushing you away, they still want that external validation of you wanting to fight for them, but they will probably still push you away because they want
Yeah.
that power in that moment. And then they may come back to you when they're not feeling particularly good about themselves again as well, too. So I'm not getting that vibe so much. If I'm completely honest, I'd probably say it feels like he leans more dismissive, fearful, avoidant, meaning dismissive, leaning, fearful, avoidant. Like, I don't feel like he's necessarily hankering on you to like reach out to him or anything like that. But in saying that, he does like it, his last ex did appear to want to fight for the relationship or at least want to get it closer. So, and you know, he's gotten back with her, and it makes me think, what's the situation with her boundaries? What's the situation with how she's, you know, fought for that relationship too? How did he feel about her protest behavior off the back of it? Already to me, it just seemed, look, not to sound rude to, you know, the ex and to Marcus, but I just sort of think, good luck to both of them.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I also think it's almost an irrelevant regardless, right? Because it's like even if you did fight for him, it's not going to work out into a healthy relationship. It's not going to meet your needs. It's not. He's not going to suddenly change. This is a person that needs to do, you know, a lot of self work on themselves. And so even if you did fight for it, I don't think it would have been long before you'd be back at the same point anyway.
I, I completely agree. I think this was just going to be a case of, you know, you were going to get back to that side where, you know, he was going to be pushing you away because of fear of intimacy. All right, so next question. What are your thoughts on him committing to someone so soon after me, especially after being so keen to go traveling when we were dating? To me, I think the whole traveling with dating, I feel like that was a way, I think that was a deactivation strategy. I think that wasn't something he was particularly serious about. I think that was just his way of trying to achieve a level of escapism from the growing intimacy in the relationship. I don't think that the travel was anything really serious. The thing is, I do think that him going to a new person, or in this case, a very old person, I think that's his safety net. Like, I think anytime things get close, he'll look for whatever feels comfortable to him. And it just so happened he had an ex in the wings who was ready to, you know, re-engage with him.
Totally agree on the travel thing. I think that was just like that, like get out of jail free card. Like, oh, this is going okay, but like I need to make sure I've got my little get out of jail free, one foot out the door situation set up. Um, I also think, like you said with the ex, it's like better the devil you know, right? You know that person on some level, like you've got history, you know their weak points. Again, it's that element of control, right? Like better the devil you know, you have information, right? And knowledge is power. So he probably already has his little ways of manipulating that situation. But I think, as in going back so soon, it really does highlight that point that we know, which is even people with fearful avoidant, dismissive avoidant, they still want and need and crave intimacy and love and connection, right? So it might not be the healthiest version that they would, you know, have access to, but they still want and need that level of intimacy, but again, on their terms, right, in terms of what they're comfortable with. And so I think Amanda was probably putting, you know, setting her stall out of this is what I need, this is what I want, this is how I expect things to go. And for Marcus, it's just like, oh, no, I don't think I can fulfill that.
No, and that's a very common line we hear from fearful avoidance who will often, well, dismissives will say it too, is I can't give you what you need or what you're looking
What
for. And it's like, you never
we
even,
deserve.
yeah, it's like, I never asked you like to give me any of those things that you think I want in the first place. You just made assumptions
Yeah.
and freaked out. So yeah, I agree. I think that a lot of this is, I think, emotional management. I think him going back to his ex is a way of him just feeling better about himself in the moment. I suspect that as things were getting close, he had a phantom ex moment. So, for any of you who are unaware of what that phenomenon means, it basically means that when you're avoidantly attached, as you're getting closer to someone, you have a moment where you start fantasizing about a previous partner you were with, and you get extremely obsessed with the idea of returning to this person, even if it was an absolute disaster, a dumpster fire of a relationship. You kind of forget about those aspects because it just feels like anything would be better than what I'm going through right now, even if logically, realistically, you're not even in a bad relationship right now. In fact, it's a great one, but you're freaking out, and one of your ways of managing that distress is to start having these dissociative episodes where it's like, wouldn't it be great to get back with the ex? So I think to me, this is him just, I think that really is what's happening there, is that he's gone back to his ex out of a Phantom X episode. I don't think that's going to last for long.
No, but again, it's that whole confusing thing, right? Of like, okay, well, this didn't work out with me because he was, scared of intimacy, but then he's now moved someone in, not to his apartment, but to his tiny apartment, right? Like the intimacy there is getting dialed all the way up, right? So interesting. But again, I can imagine that leaves Amanda with these questions of like, well, why, why, right? Like if he's scared of intimacy, but then he can move the ex into his tiny apartment, that doesn't make sense.
I agree. And you've actually raised a really good point that I forgot to mention, which is, it can be really devastating because then you personalize it and think, well, hang on, if
Yeah.
I like, what does this mean about me? Was I so bad that he decided to go back to an ex that, he didn't want to be with? Like, he's now escalating it. So it's very easy to compare yourself and also to think, oh shit, did I do something wrong? And, was there something wrong with me? And it's like, no, 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 no. The only reason he's doubling down on this person is because it's exciting for the time being until it's not.
Yeah, totally. And again, it's like there's a lot of uncertainty when you're dating someone new, right, in those early stages. And we know, like, we kind of pinpointed there's maybe the infatuation stage. And then as you're getting more intimate, like you move into the more familiar stage, right? So he's already been through that with the ex. They've already done like one loop around the sun with that. So now, like, certain elements are not getting triggered. Um, but yeah, it can definitely leave you with questions of, like you said, worthiness, like, what was it about me? Was this person they better for them? Um, but again, when we look at it, the big picture, there's just patterns there of unavailability, instability, confusion, and none of those things are what you want in a relationship.
No, I completely agree with you. And then the final point that Amanda wanted us to cover was the day Marcus ended things with me, we were supposed to go paddleboarding somewhere I loved that he'd never been. Is it common for avoidance to get stuck in repetitive patterns generally? I remember him telling me about his life before he went traveling with his ex long-term girlfriend. He'd only been in the country for about 9 months when I met him, and the life he was trying to create now sounded exactly like the same as the one he'd had with his ex-girlfriend. Also, the new girlfriend looked like a clone of his ex and has the same hobbies as him, which the long-term ex did too. I felt like he was stuck in time, stuck in his routine, stuck on his hobbies, living a repetitive cycle. Someone said maybe he's got ASD. I've got to be honest, I don't recognize that acronym. Do you actually recognize that one, Laura?
I did. I googled it. I think it's the autistic, something to
Oh,
do with autism.
like Asperger's syndrome or something like that.
Yeah,
I mean, I've got to be honest and say, disclaimer, I'm not a neurodivergence expert, so I'm not 100% sure. But that is very much an avoidant thing in the context that a lot of avoidance do labor over past experiences. And it's also a trauma thing too. Like people who are still stuck in the past emotionally haven't grown up and moved on from those moments. So, of course, they're still looping back in those moments.
yeah, totally. And again, like if someone's got, like we kind of highlighted, that need for control, right, or the need for familiarity, then doing something outside of that, like with the paddleboarding and something that he's maybe not familiar with, or an area that he's not as familiar with. Again, it could have just, along with the growing intimacy or the growing kind of trajectory of like maybe this is going to need commitment at some point, like um, all of it just builds up, right? Until it's overwhelming, they're dysregulated, and then they just make that impulsive decision to like, no, this needs to be cut off. Like, you're making me feel uncomfortable. Because again, if they don't have that attunement to what they're feeling or why they're feeling that, which you wouldn't have if you've got a history of trauma and you've not done any, work on that, you are going to be more confused and dysregulated. And then it's easier to just be like, oh, it's Amanda's fault that I'm feeling this way. If we get rid of Amanda, then I can regulate and feel better again, right? And have that relief that is talked about a lot when it comes to avoidance.
Yep. And I think it actually is very disturbing that he's going ahead and recreating these deja vu-esque experiences with previous girls. If anyone's listened to Deja Vu by Olivia Rodrigo, that is literally lyric by lyric, beat by beat, exactly what this is like, what's going on here. Many avoidants do have a type, if you will, that they go back to over and over and over again, because not only is it what's familiar, but they're trying to recreate a lot of that intensity they felt for a previous person. And so they're taking a lot of that unprocessed emotion, which they think they've moved on from, and start bundling it to the next person. And they're going to continue to date people like this, where they take a lot of their baggage, that emotional stuff, including the positive emotions for an ex they haven't got rid of, and apply it to the next person. It's sad. It's like, bro, move on. Like, yes, you had a great experience with that ex, but it's like, that was then, this is now. And it's how sad. It's like he can only feel a degree of comfort by still playing out these old emotions, which he hasn't even resolved yet.
Yeah, and for me, it just speaks to that sentiment of, you'll look for me in every person you meet, right? So if it doesn't work out with one person, because the main problem here is Marcus's trauma, unresolved issues, and insecure attachment, then no matter who it is, no matter who comes in, it's going to play out the same way, right? But it's almost like, okay, I can't have that person because maybe they've moved on now because they, knew this wasn't going to be a healthy relationship. So how can I, recreate that in a way?
Yeah, I completely agree with you. Just around it here, off the back of those questions, I just want to say, Amanda, thank you so much for submitting this letter, because I think it's very easy, like I said before, to shame ourselves off the back of situationships, thinking that, they weren't you know, they're not as significant as a relationship. But it's like, no, there's so much stuff that happens in situationships that can lead to such emotional distress. And I think your experience is extremely valid, and it's deeply painful to go through this. And I'm sorry that, you had this experience. On one hand, congratulations also for the growth you gained out of it. But fuck me, they're terrible experiences to go through when they go south.
Yeah, totally. And I think probably a lot of people would recognize elements of things they've experienced within that letter as well, right? Like of having those gut feelings and maybe kind of downplaying them at the time, and giving someone, that benefit of the doubt and see how things go, and kind of starting to see that pattern that maybe this is not viable, but still wanting to just kind of see if it can be salvaged.
Agreed. I don't know about you, Laura. Like, one thing I will say as a suggestion for Amanda going forward is, if you ever feel uncomfortable and you're having a yike moment, express the yike, because it will save you and your brain so much hassle. Because even if it's a small thing, just see how they respond, because that will often tell you a lot.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And also the confusion, right? So I think often we might internalize that and think, oh, I need more information, or we'll be reflecting, thinking like, is this a me thing? Is this my trauma coming up, or is this a problem with the here and now? And just getting used to voicing that. Because I think again, Amanda mentioned at the beginning, like she has that history of anxious attachment, insecure attachment. And with that, it's quite often a pattern to second guess ourselves, or over the years we've disconnected from that gut feeling, and having that conversation helps you get more clarity, right? So we're looking for clarity or reassurance when we bring those things up, and that other person and how they respond is going to be feedback, right? It's going to be extra data that you can, if you are feeling confused about something, say for example the laughing emoji, right, when she mentioned meeting friends, and she could have potentially, when we're looking at this with the benefit of hindsight, be like, okay, this has made me feel this way, so let me try and get some more clarity here. This is an opportunity for a conversation of like, oh, you laughed at that. How are you feeling about potentially meeting friends? Does that feel like something that's way off in the future for you? Is it something you would want? Like, I'm just a little confused by your laughing emoji reaction to that question, to that statement, right? And then if he'd have been like, oh God, no, that's way off in the future for me, or oh no, I was just out and about shopping and I just quickly laugh reacted to it, right? It's given us that extra feedback.
And I think that also can help you come out of a limerent episode as well too, because if you start speaking up more for that discomfort that you're feeling, it starts to do things to the brain, where I know personally from firsthand experience, it starts to make you question what you're actually experiencing and help you be like, wait a second, I'm not feeling as excited about this as I once did. Now, it doesn't mean to say that that excitement can't be rebuilt if you are able to establish a sense of trust off the back of it. That would be the ideal outcome. That, you know, if your partner is able to come back to you and be like, yeah, let me explain that reaction. I undercommunicated. I'm really sorry. Fantastic. That's much better than, I'd say, like, you know, the example you were sharing, Laura, where it's like, you know, um, in the example you provided, which I loved how you described it, you know, it's as if Marcus was going to say, oh no, friends are like far off in the future for me. It's like, well, then why the hell did you not bring that up earlier? It's
Yeah.
like, what the hell? And so I think that's why I'm a big fan of talking out the discomfort, because then that way you do start to protect yourself from problems.
And I think, again, that's one of the key differentiators, right, between securely attached people, like people with secure attachment, versus the avoidance, the anxious, is because on both sides, whether it's avoidant, like having that confusion, because Marcus is obviously getting reactions and feelings and whatever's. So if he'd have communicated some of his confusion or some of his fears and doubts and worries, and then we're then coming into that more secure, transparent energy, right? And that base versus everyone kind of keeping it to themselves and internalizing it or waiting for more stuff to unfold before we finally address it. It just definitely seems to be, again, not always easy, right? It can be definitely uncomfortable to have those conversations, especially in the early stages, but it is for that greater good. And if we're always working towards secure attachment, those secure relationship skills, right?
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I can see, but on a separate note, I can see someone here said it's like they're all the same person, and yeah, unfortunately, there are a lot of people who are like this. And even though there are people out there being like, don't identify with your attachment style, I actually push back on that and say your attachment style can be intrinsically linked with not only your behavior, but also your personality. Like, I'm sorry, but you know, if you've got trauma, which is the basis of an insecure attachment, that's going to impact how you show up as a human being, which therefore means you're going to behave in some very similar ways to a bunch of other people.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's unfortunate, but there does seem to be a lot of, and again, it's not getting better really, is it? Because it's like, it's just wounding upon wounding. And I think we kind of highlighted at the beginning um, that Amanda's been on this journey for 7 years and then has still had this situation with an avoidant, right? So it's like there's just a lot of people out there with trauma and we are going to come across them. And because it's not an out and out deal breaker, you know, if someone's got attachment wounds, but they need to have the awareness and the willingness to be looking at it and working on it and working through it and not just running for the hills at the first sign of discomfort.
Yes, exactly. And this is where I want to leave people with a very clear message too. Like, one thing that actually came up to me off the back of Amanda's letter too is when he was trauma dumping about his background with his dad. I got to be honest, and this is me being ruthless. This is not me with my clients. Please take what I'm about to say with a pinch of salt. This is an edutainment section, not me as a counselor speaking. I'm not dating someone with that amount of history. I'm like, sorry, no. You actually need to have resolved that history. I'm happy to have I'm happy for you to share bits and pieces of that history, but for him to just say that all in one go makes me think you are not ready for the reality of a relationship. You're still defined by that trauma. I think that like, one thing I noticed with a lot of my audience, and I don't know if this is the same for you, Laura, as well. I find that a lot of the people that I work with and also who come to my page are very conscientious and empathetic people. They're very understanding. But I really want to encourage people to actually grow a bit of not only healthy narcissism, but also wherewithal to learn it's like it is not your responsibility to be an unpaid therapist. It is not your responsibility to be doing caretaking for people who are not outgrowing the trauma.
Absolutely. And it's just a compatibility issue at that point, right? Because it's like Amanda's done 7 years of healing work. And like she said, you know, there was still some unresolved father wound stuff that came up as a result of this situationship that she was then able to work through. So, like, this doesn't happen overnight. Even if he started counseling or therapy, you know, today, it's still going to take a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of dedication.
Yeah.
and potentially years to work through and unpack and resolve that alongside building up his relational skills and his secure attachment. And someone like Amanda, who's already invested 7 years, she doesn't want to be starting from scratch with someone who and going through, still continuing her journey, but also then having, like you said, that almost unpaid counselor role of being that person for your partner. Again, everyone's got stuff, unresolved stuff and things they're working on, but it's picking someone who's got a manageable level, right? Like that's unmanageable, I think, for someone at Amanda's point in her journey. And maybe the ex is more on his level of, again, and
100
again, wild aspersions here, but like maybe the ex has also not been to therapy or done any level of self-work.
I completely agree with everything you said. I mean, like attracts like, and often I find that a lot of these, for some individuals, for Marcus, maybe his definition of secure is being with someone like his ex. It's probably got some toxic behavior in there. It's probably not going to be a relationship which is defined by stability. It might be one that's defined by a lot of hot and cold episodes. But that's what his comfort zone is. That's what feels good to him. And you know, there are many examples of this out there. Let's take a very pejorative example of like sugar daddies and, other variations of that too. It's all about what feels comfortable to the self-esteem of each person. And, that's what makes it really challenging and tragic in these cases. It's like, look, I think these people did actually fall in love with us. They actually did really like us, but they're not going to work for us. Like they're not their disposition. They're not going to fight for these relationships.
No, and I think as well, like you were talking about the compatibility with the ex is almost like that person's potentially going to enable him to stay the same, right? In the ways that are important to him. Whereas someone like Amanda is more likely to be shining a light on like, hey, what's going on with this? And can we talk about this? Which feels very uncomfortable and is going to require change. And again, just to say that, Amanda's done really well here to get out of this because after the work she's done, getting involved with someone at such a, disparity of levels of healing and awareness can be very damaging to someone that's already done work, right? So there's the studies of people that have secure attachment and get involved with avoidance that end up becoming anxious, right? So it's like you don't want to be in a position where through default that you're then undoing some of the work that you've done or making your life harder by constantly kind of having to go over old ground with someone that's not at the same level of healing as you.
Completely agree. I was going to say, I did see one question which I thought was really good, and I was keen to throw this to you, Laura, for your opinion on. I've got my own 2 cents on it, but basically they were asking if an avoidant is breaking up with you because they think you deserve better, why is it that they don't take that initiative to actually be better for their partner?
Great question, and I think one that many people have probably asked themselves. Um, because it takes work, right? Like it takes work. So sometimes I think the you deserve better is a get out of jail card, right? In terms of I don't think we're compatible or I'm not as into this as you are. And it's just nicer to say that. So I think taking those ones aside and going with the ones that actually are, it's like this, right? Like people have some level of self-awareness. And so maybe Marcus was aware of the fact that I'm I don't have the facilities, right? I don't have the wherewithal to ever really satisfy or be the partner that Amanda wants, needs, and deserves. And it's that level of awareness that maybe not super conscious, but on some level, it's like, no, I see that I don't. This is going to be too much hard work for me. This person's going to be asking of me more than I can provide, more than I'm comfortable with. And so I think it's largely to do with that. There's the odd exception, right, where someone does say like, hey, I think you deserve better, and actually I'm going to go away and become better. And even if that requires a bit of separation to work on themselves and to get to a point where they can go, actually, no, I don't want to let this person slip away because I can see that they're really good for me and I value them. But they seem to be like the few and far between cases, right? Most of the time it's just like, get out of jail free card. I'm not willing to become the person or to put in the level of work required to make this work.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything you said. And in addition to that, I'm going to pinch what one user here said to add to what you've shared. That's because as an avoidant, you'd have to confront your shame, themselves, and a whole life of avoidancy and what they've done to others, And that's terrifying. And I think that is absolutely there for sure. I think a lot of these avoidantly attached people, when they're saying that stuff to you, like, I can't give you what you need, I think you deserve better than me, and all the one liners like, I like hiking, but you don't like hiking, so therefore we're incompatible. I think a lot of that stuff is BS at that particular point in time. I think there it is laced a bit with truth. Like, I think there is a bit of truth to the fact that it's like, yes, you are objectively as an avoidant. I'm not avoidant, but like pretending I was. I think there is a bit of truth to the fact that they don't feel worthy compared to the person they're with. And that I think is coming from shame. Absolutely. But I think in the moment when they're saying that, they're almost throwing their hands up in the air, being like, I just can't be bothered giving you what you need. Like, it's just too much work. Like, why would I want to do this? And I feel like it's like a child who just is having a bit of a tantrum in that moment and is like, I don't want to go to school. I don't want to have my vegetables. It's like, yeah, well, you actually eventually do need to put your big pants on or skirt on and actually be a functioning human being. And I think actually stepping into that role, because a lot of these people do have a strong Peter Pan syndrome and emotional immaturity and arrested development, they're not going to do that.
No, there's two little things that I just want to add into that. So the first one is, I forget who said it. I think it was some pastor or something. It was on about the pint people and the gallon people,
Yeah.
right? So a pint person can never fulfill a gallon person, right? Um, so that's always something to keep in mind, right? Someone's capacity. And again, I think this is Amanda and Marcus to a T. Amanda's got a much bigger capacity for what she can give, what she can receive. And Marcus, is almost like shriveled up, right, from all this trauma and shame and what he can't provide and give. And that's definitely playing into this, I think, on some level. The other thing as well, and this is going off on a little tangent, but you might have seen it. Talk around. Some people don't actually value the person in front of them, right? So they more value like what you can do for me, right? Like that transactional nature of relationships of, okay, we're not really looking at you as the whole. And again, this I think plays into that discard element of it's easier to discard someone if you're not really truly seeing and appreciating and valuing everything that's in front of you. And
Yeah.
it's almost like then you're more easy to replace. If they're never really truly connected and getting to know you on that deeper level, then it's easy to replace you with someone else who is gonna, be intimate with me and make me feel good and be a distraction, right? And if they're using the person or the relationship for certain ends, that's easier to replace, right, than people that are typically looking for partnership, that depth, that level of true intimacy, not just like, what can you do for me? But I value as a person, I want to grow with you. I want us to, grow and build and explore together. Again, probably links back to pint and gallon people.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think also, with these individuals, I think that it's not something I've talked about explicitly, but I think, Laura, you know exactly what I'm talking about. When we think of someone's reticular activating system, the part of us that, looks for confirmation bias and is like, looks at things under a very particular lens. I think that when they become obsessed with people and they do genuinely have very strong positive feelings for their partners, I think they see their partner under a very superficial lens at times. I think that on one hand, they admire the expressiveness and also the emotional maturity of their partners. I think they crave for a bit of that, even though they have a lot of resistance to doing that. But even if you grow and outgrow them, which a lot of you will, I think that they still look at you under that very nostalgic, romanticized lens of who you were when they met you. And they don't have the capacity at times to move beyond that that RAS of you. They sort of just want to look at you under the lens of, oh, you're that person who I always thought was going to be the one that got away. You're this amazing person who I, didn't end up being with because we just weren't compatible. I feel like they have very distorted thinking and feeling around relationships. So I agree that whilst they may have degrees of strong positive feeling for their partners, I think because they don't allow that next step of connection, they're never really putting any skin in the game. So they only allow themselves so far to go before they're like, nah, don't want this.
Absolutely. It's like they see like a slice of you versus the whole picture. And
Which
there's
is
a
how they
quote,
shop, which is how they shop for everyone else.
yeah, there's a quote, I can't remember it off the top of my head, like who it's by or the word for word what it is, but it's like if someone falls in love with your flowers instead of your like the roots and the wholeness of who you are, what do they do when winter comes and the flowers fall off, right? So it's like you're looking at that pattern, not just what person's saying, but like their behavior and if they have the capacity to see the wholeness of you, right? And are they looking to get to know the wholeness of you? And again, if they're not even knowing or getting to know the wholeness of themselves, probably an indication that it's not compatible.
I completely agree. I think just to round out my piece with this is to say, to anyone who's been through this, I also want to extend a big sorry because this is, I've got to be honest, incredibly common and it happens a lot. And if you're looking to learn from this experience, I just say, be bloody careful of rush. I know there are some great content creators out there. I like Sabrina Zohar in general. I think she's got some great stuff. But I will challenge her with regards to pace because even though as a dating rule, it's usually encouraged to go slow. And I know she broke that rule with her partner. Great, more power to them. But I'm going to tell you my professional opinion. Rush intensity is often the sign of a dysregulated nervous system. And I think a lot of you are not looking for an avoidantly attached partner who's racing for the hills for you or to get away from you.
Totally. When I work with clients, we have like a due diligence checklist, right? Of like, it's going to take you time to answer certain questions about a person. So even if you have intense dates, like these 7-hour dates or whatever, and you feel like you've got that level of intimacy, you don't really, right? It's those levels of boundaries that people have to earn the right to us and to that level of relationship over time. I once heard someone say you've got to do one trip around the sun with someone before you really know them. You see them in different environments, different seasons, and until you've done that, which you can't possibly do after 4 weeks, 4 months even, we've just got to allow it to unfold and to be like, yeah, I like you and I like where this is going, but let's see what happens. Because again, those avoidant fears typically don't get triggered. It's like a tripwire, right? That trips at a certain point. Some of them are sooner than others, but typically, as the intimacy and need for commitment grows, that's not until that level month 3 or 4 anyway. So it's definitely worth taking it slowly for sure.
I completely agree. Like we said before, speak up for your yikes, take it slow, keep getting educated, keep going to therapy because you'll find people like us who are at a very similar level and hopefully we will repopulate the planet and there'll be no more insecure attachment.
What a wonderful world that would be.
I don't think astrology will allow it though. So, we've got to have some drama for growth.
Yeah, but a more like a higher population of securely based people would be nice.
I agree. In any case, Laura, thank you so much for being part of this experience. It was so good to finally actually do a something with you. We've known each other for 4 years, and this is the first time we've actually gotten on live to do something.
Yeah, yes, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for inviting me. Shame I couldn't see your face throughout the whole thing, but
I know. I've been able to see you, and it's been fine.
Well, I'll have to watch it back on the replay.
Well, in any case, thank you everyone for joining. Oh, very quickly, 2 questions for you, Laura. 1, are you taking clients at the moment?
Yes, I'm taking clients privately, one-on-one at the moment.
Amazing. That's basically my little sly way of saying if anyone got value out of chatting with Laura, though she's not part of my team, please go and check Laura out because not only is her content hilarious, but she is very, very knowledgeable, experienced, therapized, and knows how to work through these sort of dating quandaries and has helped many a person find their partner. And lucky last, where can people find you if they want to get to know you and your work?
Well, firstly, thank you for the lovely words, lovely kind words. So the best place to find me is over on Instagram on my page, which is quit dating idiots _ between quit and dating and idiots. So that's where I post content, and on my page you'll find links if you're interested in finding out more about coaching. Send me a DM, or you can book in a discovery call, a free discovery call to chat about whether coaching might be a good fit for you.
Love it. I was going to be cheeky at one point in the letter reading and be like, on a scale of 1 to idiot, how much of an idiot has Marcus been? But I thought that would be inappropriate because I know the guy. I don't think the guy's an idiot in that sense. I think that he's just obviously got a lot of trauma that he's not working on. But still, no one wants to be, stuck in these situations. So definitely check out Laura, check out one of my team members if you want to, get further support with this. But for now, thank you everyone for being part of this experience, this letter reading, and I'm sure we'll be back to do more of this, Laura.
Perfect. I look forward to it.
All right. Bye everyone. Thank you very much.
Bye.